welcome back to another episode of Just
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
Looking
looking
for a Nut,
for a nut,
trying to
trying. I
get
messed up on it
out
too.
of
Out of this rut.
this rut. Not
Rut.
bad.
And the first half we killed it. The second half was the worst you've ever had on this show, hands down.
It's either you feared mispronouncing or you feared going the speed or I feared the same exact thing. So I don't know. Maybe we'll never know the answer to
All
any
of
of
the
that.
above. It's all of the above. I'll take the blame for that one.
Oh man, I wish I could share bits and pieces of the different fears that I might be experiencing now, but that story
Yeah.
is yet to be lived, and I hope that's a story I could tell in the upcoming days. But I was thinking about this topic, and one thing that really came to mind for me, and I don't know if this is how your life works as well, but with these topics or some of the other podcasts or conversations that I have, I find that there's so much connection that happens between my real life experiences and some of these discussions. Like
Yeah.
literally, do you need fear in your story? And the story of my life and everything I'm going through and everything. Like fear is it's a pretty critical component
It's
at
like I
the
found you.
moment. Yeah, it's a founder. So I just find it interesting how once you put out a thought out there, it finds a way to manifest itself. And so I don't know if you experience the same thing in your life, with your podcast or whatever it is that you put out there. And then
Hmm.
over a course of a week, it's like, oh man, that's literally the same exact theme from one day to another.
Yeah, I've noticed it with guests. I'll record something and then it's like they'll be talking about a set topic and I'm like, wow, I'm going through this right now. That tends to find me. And then books are the other thing I've noticed with a lot of books from doing a lot of reading. There's nothing better than when a book finds you at like the right time. And that's kind of
Mm,
what happened with you and everything with the topic today. It's just like, not saying it's a right time, but it's crazy how some of this stuff just lines up perfectly like it
mm-hmm,
does. And by the way, the
mm-hmm.
sounds in the background that you have, the
Yeah.
coolest you've had so far. You're not sitting in your closet somewhere. This is definitely a cool
No,
setup.
I'm under a mosquito net in Ghana in a place called Cape 3 Points. Escape 3 Points. That's the resort for anyone that's listening. I know that Jessica's tuning in here and James is here as well. So yeah, no, this is all natural life. In fact, today one of the things talking about fear, slightly unrelated fear, not necessarily fear in regard to my story, but more so fear in general. I was opening this door and I'm staying in this bamboo house that's been built
Yeah.
by the people who work here. And I was opening the door to get in for this podcast. There's a huge spider. I've never seen this spider before. So there's when you think about wildlife in especially here in Africa, I mean, I can't name you one thing that I have seen before. The
Yeah.
type of spiders or snakes or anything. So I know for me those things are definitely a fear of, but I wonder when it comes to the story part, like the personal narrative and the things that we choose to create our lives around. I wonder what role does fear play? Like when you think about your own experience, do you think fear has a role in it all? And if so, how do you process that? Like what role does it have at the end of the day?
I think fear is day in and day out like a fundamental like part of decision making. Like it helps us get to where we are. You always hear face your fears. My story, I think, is there's so much fear, so much uncertainty, so much curiosity as to what the next day holds. Um, and I think fear causes us to, or not causes, but it helps us if you choose to capitalize on it, step outside of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Try new things. I mean, look at your Carmen San Diego right now, traveling all over the world and doing all this stuff. Fear has to factor into that. a lot. Even just from
Mhm.
the initial like planning stage. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot of fear that goes into where you're probably getting ready the day before and you're like, do I really want to do this? Is this this is going to be so much to do. But
Mhm.
oftentimes fear, someone told me one time, fear, once you capitalize on that and really like jump on it, it's just opportunity waiting in the weeds. And yeah, you've had such a good experience from what I've seen following you
Mhm.
for, seems like you've been gone for like a year now.
Yeah.
But I mean, jumping from country to country and doing what you've been doing, and you've been doing a lot of this on your own too.
Mhm.
It's got to be a lot of fear that goes into that. But yeah, I do. I think fear is a fundamental part of our decision making day in and day out.
I'm the same way, and I think the more I actually reflect upon my experience of travel, the one thing that continues to come back to me is doing solo travel for anyone that's ever done it, or Bodhi, I don't have you ever done that actually? Solo travel abroad?
Not overseas. Yeah. The,
So
the
one
the
thing
only
that
thing I've done solo is like drive to Charlotte, North Carolina or something. That's it. That's it.
so one thing that I realized through my own experience of traveling solo into different countries is without a doubt when I first started the fear was a very evident factor, primarily because I was going into cultures that I couldn't really experience, and there's only so much that I could read in a book about any given culture, and it oftentimes turned out to be completely different when I actually
Yeah.
landed in that particular country. And I think for me, it's in the past however many years, I really found it to be of importance to be able to live the story that I dream of. I just I don't like being able to take a s- um, take a seat and understand that there's something more that I could have done. There's some other element of my story that I could have lived out. I I, I don't like that feeling, and I think part of it has to do with it doesn't align with my character.
Yeah.
So when I first started this, and I started this trip 4 months ago, I did the Camino, and I was the same exact way. I mean, I was afraid at first. I was gonna walk 300, 400 miles through a country or countries I've never been to before. So I didn't know how the villages or the people in the villages were going to react to me. I didn't know if the things that I heard prior to traveling, such as be careful with your belongings, you might get robbed, all these things, because all these things do happen. They
Yeah.
happen to someone, which later on create a story for someone else. And that's the things that I started to realize is that, yes, there might be certain things that happen along the journey, but I think that there's something interesting within fear where it allows me to dig even deeper within myself to better understand some of these components. Now, don't get me wrong, there are probably certain fears that I wish to avoid, such as putting myself in danger or my life at risk. But at the same time, I mean, traveling through foreign countries, it's when are you not doing those things, right? When are you not putting
Yeah.
yourself at risk to how people are going to receive you or reject you,
Hmm.
depending on where you are? So I know for me, once I landed in Africa, one of the things that I tried to do off the bat is I just started to greet people. I, I was saying hello, how are you, how was your day, until literally I couldn't say the words anymore to every single person. And what I've noticed through some of my friends who are locals is that people actually love when you do that.
Yeah.
People say good morning to each other every single morning when they pass. So that was the easiest way for me to blend into that culture is I just started to do what they do. But in that moment I had a choice, right? I could have been afraid of the fact that I was in a completely different culture, and let's be honest, I'm probably the only white person within a 300-mile radius.
Hmm.
I could have been completely shell shocked and I could have been overwhelmed and just said, no, I can't interact this. I can't do these things. So I just started to embrace it. And I think like you said earlier, facing your fears, there's something about facing that fear that really helped me dig deeper into really who I am and possibly find confidence and clarity and whatever else that I may not have had before.
Yeah. I've my journey. I just focused on like on my military career.
Mm-hmm.
I was comfortable before I joined, and I was afraid of making a life changing decision because I had a wife, I had a daughter. I was nervous about doing it. And I was like, what if I do this and I fail? What if I do this
Mm-hmm.
and we paint these narratives in our head of what's going to happen, and it's always like the absolute worst scenario in the world. But I joined and I loved it, and it gave me a little sense of
Mm-hmm.
confidence. Like, okay, you're going to have these fears, but there's such a reward waiting at the end of it if you can conquer them. With certain ones too. But then the biggest one for me, and I don't know if you've
Mm-hmm.
ever had this, Ollie, because you've gone out there and done TED Talks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Public speaking, fear
Oh
of
yeah.
public speaking. And I right now I'm living in Alabama. I'm teaching an instructor course, and I got picked to teach this instructor course after I was teaching Airman Leadership School for 3 years. I never would have been here if I would have listened to the fear and not faced my fear, because
Mm-hmm.
I was too afraid to get up in front of a large group of people and speak, which is funny because now I live behind a microphone. But
Yeah.
I talk all day now, but um, I was comfortable sitting behind a desk working on computers for the military and just doing my thing day in and day out, coming home, being with my family. And then someone told me, get comfortable being uncomfortable, embrace tackle your fears. And I defeated my fear of public speaking. And I still get that fear
Mm-hmm.
every now and then. If I get in front of a really huge group, I've got some notable people in there, then yeah, I'm absolutely going to get nervous. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
logging in before we do these.
Yeah.
Uh, Today, I actually logged in, and because of our topic, usually I have all sorts
Yeah.
of notes. I have all these things ready to go. Today, because of our topic, I wrote nothing down. I
Yeah.
came in unprepared. I said I'm going to come in with a little bit of fear in me
Mm-hmm.
as to where this conversation is going to go, and can I hold my own with Oleg? Um, so
Hmm.
yeah, fear surrounds us all the time.
I think with public speaking, especially, it's something that what I realized about my journey is I don't think that fear ever leaves. I think that fear is always there because
Hmm.
every stage is different and every environment is different. There are some audiences that I've been able to present in front of. I've realized that within, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes, I would get comfortable. And then from there, it's almost as if I'm having a conversation with a friend. But
Yeah.
still, those first 5 to 10 minutes initially are the things that I truly fear the most. I think a lot of that has to do with the rejection and how people are going to perceive what I have to say and how they're going to react. Kenny said the same exact thing. Jessica says, I think perspective of fear is an interesting conversation. When my husband lost his job last month, we began having a conversation about fear. He shared he was always afraid of working for himself because of the fear of not having security. Losing his job 2 weeks before Christmas proved there's never truly 100% security. And it's true.
Hmm.
I mean, nothing is ever certain. That's the thing that I'm learning to this point, right? And whenever I feel like something is certain, life proves otherwise. Life always shows me another way that, hey, whenever you feel like there is something that is certain or there's some certain level of comfort, then an event happens and it completely shatters that belief. I think the same goes for jobs. I think the same goes for anything I do in
Hmm.
life. I mean, I assume that somehow the next breath is going to take place.
I got a question for you, Oleg, because
Yeah,
you've been successful with your podcast. You've been success. I mean, you're a world traveler at this point in your life.
yeah.
Um, but when has fear crippled you? Like, what is that one thing you look back at and you're like, I wish now, knowing what I know, that I would have tackled this and I would have taken action on something.
I think for me, so travel was definitely one of those. I put that on the back burner for many years. Because, well, all the reasons that I think many people face, and that's not enough money, not the right time, too many responsibilities. But also, I know that one of the other reasons for why I didn't choose to travel earlier is because I was afraid of the world.
Hmm.
I was afraid of going into cultures that I've never been exposed to before. I was afraid of going to Africa because And name me one movie, and maybe I just haven't seen the right movies, that put Africa or describe Africa as a place of, you know, this wonderful place that you go to see these things. Oftentimes, Africa is described through the lens of fear, right? People who, I don't know,
Adam
do bad
Sandler went
things.
there,
Like,
didn't he? Didn't Adam Sandler go
yeah,
there?
yeah. So like all these things happen as part of it. So that's where I started to realize. I'm getting back under my mosquito net here, but that's what I realized. If I'm being honest, outside of that, I would say, where else does fear hold me back right now? It's really not that many areas, but that's only because I'm choosing to actively pull the trigger on it.
Mm-hmm.
Writing a book, right? I'm in the process of completing this first one. I chose to be afraid of the process because of all these perceptions of how a book has to be written. Many people told me that the only way to write a book is you have to go through a publisher, you have to do all these different things, when the reality of the matter is you can publish the book yourself right now, in this given moment. You can write the story as it is. You don't have to wait till the next chapter. So that's what I started to realize about it. And I think Nike said it best, although I think the more accurate description is more so not just do it, but just do it tomorrow. I think it's a description for many people.
Yeah, I
I
like the
followed that line for line for many years.
I like the comment that you probably know this guy, Joe Bogdan. We've heard of
Yeah, I
him
don't know.
before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just here and there.
When it comes to a significant action, I feel that if I don't have a healthy amount of fear, I probably don't care enough. And
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I think that's spot on. There's things that, going into, if I'm invested in it, yeah, I'm gonna have that
Mm-hmm.
fear. If there's other things, I'm like, I'll just go ahead and do it. Um, and there's no fear there. It's because you're not invested in it whatsoever. Um, yeah, I think for me, um, I mean, every day. I mean, we're this course I'm teaching now. There's so many changes. We've been uh, had some COVID issues. We've been teaching online. We've been teaching in residence. It's been
Mm-hmm.
having to change my approach right and left, and then what we do by putting ourselves out here virtually. I mean, there's a lot of fear that could go into that, um, just by putting yourselves out. So I mean, I think that it's something that even when it's kind of in our subconscious, it's still there. Fear
Yeah,
every day that we wake up, and everything we do, I think it plays a small part in it, some way, shape, or form. But what do you think about that?
I think it plays a role in that. I heard someone say this. I think it was Jay Shetty on his book, or in his book called "Think Like a Monk,"
Yep, it's a good book.
where he posed a question to a lot of the listeners, and the question is, what are you really afraid of? So
Yeah.
I literally just started to ask myself that question on a daily basis. What am I really afraid of? And why am I really afraid of that? And that's, I think, with that question, it helps me get into just action, just start acting on these things
Hmm.
instead of waiting for the right time. Because, I mean, let's face it, at least what my experience has taught me is that the right time is now. Nothing about tomorrow is guaranteed. Nothing about the next moment is guaranteed. So the longer that I wait, the more unlikely those things are going to take place. And I know for some people, including myself, for many years, I refrained from that question. I didn't want to dig deep. I didn't want to figure out what I was truly afraid of. So now the fact that I'm actually able to do this and experience these different cultures across different parts of the world, I fear those things because I
Hmm.
had a different perception of them once upon a time. But now that I experience them firsthand, I mean, I don't know. I truly don't fear it. You know? Yeah, it's a different culture. Yes, I'm surrounded by people who may or may not look like me, but at the same time, like, why am I afraid of the difference? Right? And I think that's the big thing that I'm learning is fear often comes from difference, in my opinion. Acknowledging the difference, but at the same time, difference is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Difference creates perspectives, different creates contrast, different creates the line between the good and the bad. So
I've,
go ahead.
I've always found for me that fear is like associated with uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
and just like that sense of the unknown. And like I can think back to going to a new school and you're so afraid to walk into that new class the first day because
Mm-hmm.
it's just unknown. It's new, and you get in there, you meet people, you're comfortable, you're fine. But then, even thinking of like going to a new job for the first day, that feeling of
Mm-hmm.
walking in the door the very first time, me going to a new squadron somewhere, you always have that little bit of fear. And um, yeah, I think that's just how I've kind of associated it with more times than I'm not afraid of the boogeyman. I'm not afraid
Mm-hmm.
of, you were talking about a spider crawling down your back earlier, and I
Yeah.
was like, what type? Like that doesn't, I'm not, we'll have a spider in the house and my wife's like, come grab the spider and,
Yeah.
do whatever. That doesn't scare me um until it bites me. Then I'll be
Yeah.
afraid. But yeah, it's just, I think for me it's more uncertainty, just not really knowing like if something, kind of going to what Joe was talking about, if you care about something
Mm-hmm.
and you have that fear, you're invested in it. But uh but yeah, I think that's, to me, a lot of other people have different definitions of fear or what is fear to them, but for me I think it's uncertainty.
I think that the other part is I don't think there's a space that's oftentimes created for this, the
Mm-mm.
discussion of one's fears about the world or the direction they want to have. And I know, let's say particular in US, not to generalize, but for many people, I think one of the reasons why spaces like that aren't created is it's assumed that everyone has it figured out. It's assumed that everyone has their sense of purpose. It's assumed that everyone has a sense of direction. But how many people do you know that actually don't? I mean, I don't know it all. I
Hmm.
might know certain steps that I want to take, but I don't know the whole journey. So there's that fear element as well in discussing the fact that I don't know certain things about the story or how it's going to play out, who are the people I'm going to meet along the way. So I think creating that space, it's probably equally as important, and that's probably why people like you and I and Scott and Jessica and Kenny and Joe and everyone that's part of this show tonight plays a role in being able to have a conversation like this and say, hey, there are things that I'm afraid of, outside of the creatures that can kill you on the spot, but also just real life obstacles, everyday obstacles that I face. And there's Joe Bogdan again. All emotions, to include fear, have their place. It's usually when we lose ourselves, when we are consumed by emotions such as fear, that they no longer serve us. Yeah. So
It's
my
true.
question, I've always been curious about this, is I think it's one thing to be able to recognize and acknowledge when fear comes up. But the thing that I've had a more difficult time doing is understanding how to use that. Do you understand how to use that as fuel, so to speak, or like motivation to keep going, to move forward?
Yeah, I definitely think fear fuels that motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, like even thinking of, just like starting a podcast or something.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I decided to start a podcast, I was still trying to tackle my fear of public speaking, but I knew that that was something I wanted to do. It was a goal that I had, and um, I didn't want to let that fear turn into regret.
Yeah.
And um, so I think once you start, you kind of alluded to it earlier. Once you start to tackle your fears, once you start to kind of corral them a little bit, you build up a little bit of confidence. But on the flip side, if you run from your fears, it's like it manifests into this beast
Yeah.
and it stops you from doing so many other things. But um, fear can easily be uh, controlled once you, it's addicting one way or the other.
Yeah.
And um, for me, it was, you know what, it started just snowballing really fast. I've conquered this fear of public speaking. Now I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to start podcasting. I know nothing about podcasting. I am
Hmm.
scared to death to even start podcasting. Boom, I'm going to start doing it. Now I'm afraid to even listen to my own voice in editing and all this other stuff that we have. But you just start knocking it out, and it just starts to build up, and it gives you confidence. And you always ask people, like, what are you afraid of, is like a common question. I'm guilty of it on the show. Like, that's a very common, what's a fear you have, when I do the icebreakers at the beginning. But
Mm-hmm.
conquering, you're always going to have fears, because you always care about something. You're always looking to that next thing, that next stage in life, that next thing that you're going to be doing. But I think it's so important to build upon that, and tackle one. It's almost like goals. Tackle it. What's the next fear you got? Tackle it, conquer it, move on to the next.
Do you think you receive an honest answer though when you ask people that question? Or do you think people are still
Mm,
afraid to honestly answer it?
I think it depends. I think a lot of times though, they think of, like, like a phobia of like bugs or heights or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's what I typically tend to get. But I think in terms of like deep answers, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, like being lonely, you know, uh, not being cut out for this job that I currently have. Answers like that, I think, is what people sometimes tend to stray away from. I think I tend to get, more like clowns, um, things of that nature. But I think in terms of giving like deep down honest answers, I think a lot of people still are afraid to really be vulnerable and to
Mm-hmm.
really come out and say. I think that we view that if we say what we're afraid of, it's viewed as like a weakness at times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for me, it's a little bit, I don't know. That's kind of it's a really good question you asked that. But for me, with a lot of these topics that we'll talk about, I'm always on here and think the last time we talked about fear back around Halloween, a different form
Mm-hmm.
of fear. But I was saying, not a lot of stuff scares me. Um, it's still to this day, there's not a whole lot that does, because I'm in touch with my emotions, where I'm at, my thoughts, my feelings, um, and I've done 2021 was a lot of soul searching for me. I
Oh
conquered a lot
yeah.
of my fears that I had internally. Um, I was never afraid of clowns or spiders or the boogeyman, but um, internally, those things that you write in a journal, or those things that you write on a vision board, or you tell those closest to you, those type of fears, like that's like a whole nother level of fears.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to tackle a lot of those recently, and I do think it has a lot to do with opening up and putting them out into the open, making them known to others, because then there's that accountability piece that goes into it too.
Yeah. I think going back to what you were talking about in regard to finding someone or being lonely, I know for me, there was definitely a chapter of my life where that was one of the fears,
Yeah.
without a doubt. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were cultural expectations set around the age, the demographic, and everything that I was a part of, where I had to have quote unquote certain things figured out. And if you didn't have those things figured out, well, then you were perceived as failure or
Yeah. What's
something.
wrong with you?
Yeah, what's wrong with you? All these things,
Yeah.
and I think what I've realized ultimately is everyone has their own journey and their own path in life, and in my case, I didn't necessarily have to follow that, but I'm not gonna say that happened overnight because it didn't. It took me many years to be able to break away from people's perspectives of how I needed to live my life, and also understand who do I listen to and who do I choose to tune out, or what do I choose to tune out? Because I think I still listen to everyone. I don't think it's possible to fully not care about anything that someone says. I think it's more so trying to understand that yes, I care to a degree, and then from there I'm gonna pick and choose which of these elements that I carry forward with me. Beyond
Do
that.
you think we ultimately fear like things
Hmm.
like that, like you just mentioned about like the relationship and the I think we talked about it before, like the white picket fences and the milkman walking down the road and everything. Do we fear other people's lofty expectations of us, their perception of it, or do we fear internally, like that internal failure?
So, in my opinion, I think we fear what we could become. I think
Hmm.
we fear our greatest versions of ourselves. And I think the reason why is because For me, once upon a time, I didn't believe it was attainable. I didn't think it was possible to have the self worth or the self confidence to actually pursue some of these dreams that seem to be way out of this world for
Yeah.
me. So that was the biggest thing that I feared, was actually achieving that thing and then looking back and saying, wow, I actually did that, or I'm about to do that. I had a professor in college who taught me this thing. She said that there are two types of people in the world. There are those that talk and then those that do, the doers and the talkers. And it truly was as simple as that at that particular chapter of my life. You can
Mm-hmm.
talk about the different things or you can do the different things. And no action is too small. That's the other thing that I started to realize about life. Even one step in a general direction is a step more than the step before. So that's what I believe in. I think, in my opinion, I think many people do fear becoming the best possible version of themselves for a variety of reasons. A, not
Yeah.
being able to do it, or listening to other people saying you can't do this, you can't do that. And even with those individuals, I mean, I shared with you earlier the number of emails I send out to all the different speaking prospects. Out of 1,000 emails, I don't know how many no's I get. Hundreds of no's. No, we're not interested. No, we can't do that. Or some people would even comment on the thing that I offer saying, hey, there's no value in this program or anything. So I just look at those things as feedback.
Yeah.
I look at every opportunity someone tells me that you can't do this as an opportunity for me to learn that they might not be able to do it. Not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it. So, but that took me, I don't know how many years, 8 to 10 years to understand that difference. So that's where I think that role plays. Do you think the same thing, or what do
Yeah.
you think you fear of the most?
I would. The one that's always intrigued me is the fear of letting down others.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of, because I know growing up, yeah, I know so many people I've talked to can probably relate to this, but expectations set on you by parents,
Mm-hmm.
and the fear of letting them down, the fear of not like you said, living up to your potential. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a real thing. And I think internally, when you really like start to, it was just it's crazy. I was just having this conversation today at lunch, but oftentimes we have this fear of not reaching our potential. But do we even know what our potential is? Do
Yeah.
we even know
And we
what we're
may never
capable?
know.
We
We
may
may
never
never know
know.
what we're actually capable of.
But we let some 70s or 80s sitcom shape what we should be doing, or our parents' goals for us should shape where we tend to like measure our lives and our success.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you like break it down to real world, like my mom had expectations for me. She had goals for
Mm-hmm.
me. I was afraid to not meet those. I was afraid to disappoint her growing up. um, you would do something to get in trouble and you were afraid. You had that fear of the consequences that would come along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And even, to when I was struggling when I was in my 20s, because I had the fear of I am not going to meet these expectations that everybody has set upon me. Um, and it's tough. Like that is brutal on somebody. Um, and even my wife, it was grades and school and expectations that others are setting, and it's just that constant fear that you live in of I made a bad grade, but that oh my gosh, there's going to be consequences to this, or people are going to be so disappointed in me. And I think once, and I'm not saying I totally shook it, but once I started to kind of shake away from trying to appease everybody else and
Mm-hmm.
being afraid of how they were going to see me or how they were going to view me, and I started just focusing on me, I think that's when I started to notice a lot of positive change in my life. Was when uh, I stopped being afraid of what other people thought and just
Yeah.
focused on me. And I think that's a
I
big
learned
thing, outside sources.
I've learned the same exact thing. I've learned that at the end of the day, all those things are just labels,
Hmm.
and there's literally an endless amount of the labels that are available, I believe. So then it just really becomes a choice. Which of the labels do I choose to associate myself with?
Yeah.
I struggle with the same exact thing. When I was growing up, my parents had similar expectation for me. I don't even think not going to, I don't think going to college and not going to college was even a conversation. It was as simple as that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
turns out that 4 years later, luckily, I was able to be educated and make a lot of these things, but we didn't have that discussion. We didn't have the discussion that, hey, maybe I don't go to college. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that both of them went to college and both of them went to college for their master's degree. So they've been in education for quite some time. My
Yeah.
brother, he received a PhD recently. So I think about these things, and I oftentimes wonder how much do past experiences actually influence the future ones, not only of myself but people surrounding me. Are the things that I'm doing the same exact things that I'm encouraging other people to do? And then in the areas of the things that I haven't experienced, how am I communicating that to other people? So if I haven't traveled the world, am I going to encourage someone to do it, or am I going to discourage them from trying that? Same exact thing with school, right? For me, going to school for the 4 years, that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to experience the 4 years. I wanted to meet different people, create different networks. And then from there, I knew that that was the end of the road for that chapter. I may go back to school once upon a time. I don't know. But at this point, I don't know what additional value it could provide to me. Getting an MBA and all these other things. I'm sure it could. Don't get me wrong, because everything does have an opportunity. So I think starting with parents, I think parents, in my opinion, do put a lot of pressure or can influence one's journey to a point where it no longer becomes your journey, but it becomes their journey,
Yeah.
right?
Their journey afraid of disappointment,
Yeah,
afraid of letting them down. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like that bird behind you that's been going
yeah.
on for like 40 minutes. I thought he disconnected us for a minute there. I got afraid that we were gonna get
No.
knocked off of here.
Now, how do you think you influence your kids? Especially when it comes to fear. How do you
So
communicate fears to them?
I love that question because I take a completely different approach than the 80s book of parenting that I grew up on.
Mm-hmm.
I do not like to, people can use power, positional
Mm-hmm.
power, and and use fear in that way off that title or off that position, whether it's a parent, whether it's a boss, whether it's whoever. I don't like to do anything with fear. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
like to inflict fear into other people. And with my daughter, with her, we'll have stern talks. I mean, we had to talk about her with the track team today, but I wasn't like, all right, I'm gonna have fear running through her veins by the time we're done with this
Right.
conversation. That's not what I was going for. Um, so I do not try to set expectations to where she's afraid to let me down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the first time your kid tells you that they were afraid to come to you or afraid to tell you something, having that in that sentence, I was afraid to do this because of how you would react. That
Mm-hmm.
that should be an eye opener. That's an eye opener for me, to where I'm like, we gotta be able to just have real talks and not, you know, do the instill fear
Surface
in
level.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I've taken a completely different approach. She's 13, but she's turning out pretty good so far.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I just like the whole bring home a report card. Kids bring home a report card, and there's like 5 A's, and there's like a C. And I think
Mm.
oftentimes those kids get afraid to bring that home. They're
Mm-hmm.
fearful. You know, you probably know what I'm talking about. Like you hide it
Oh
under
yeah.
the bed,
I
you
was that
forge the
kid. Yeah.
signature, and but you would not give it to your parent because you were afraid. You were
Mm-hmm.
afraid of what they were going to do. And I swear, growing up as a kid, I didn't think there was a person in the world, even Mike Tyson in his prime, that could take Susan Bodenheimer when she was pissed off about a report card. And But I don't want my daughter to have those same fears, and I want
Yeah.
her to have open communication with me. So I've learned, instead of saying like, "What the hell, you got this C," focus on those A's that she got, and like, what can we do to fix that C? But praise them for the hard work that they've done, and don't just. And some people will disagree, and that's fine. You can disagree with me all you want. Um, but yeah, I just that's just how I parent. I don't parent by fear. I don't teach by fear. I don't lead by fear. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have to. I'll
Mm-hmm.
let people fear. They can invoke fear in themselves for their own goals and aspirations that they want, but I'll help them achieve those and conquer their fears. But I'm not going to sit there and pump fear in their veins every single day.
Yeah. Bodhi, obviously you and I can have this conversation for many, many hours, but I'm afraid that due to our time difference, I might run into the problem of not getting enough sleep. That's one of the fears right now. And then the bird in the background.
That bird,
Uh,
that's our Scott Mason for this episode.
oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna send this to him. How can people connect with you? And I know that you also have another podcast. Actually, was it released today? Episode was released today, or is it yesterday?
Yeah, it was actually released today. So These Shadows podcast, over at theseshadowspodcast.com. You can head over there, check out all of our good stuff. We had Art Bell last week, the creator of Comedy Central. This week, you talk about timely. We had the genesis of
Mm-hmm.
Just a Squirrel Looking for a Nut with yourself and Scott Mason. So that episode dropped today. We have a stacked lineup of guests coming for the next couple of weeks. Where I got some episodes recorded, and then I got our March Madness rebound episodes, and I got some really cool
Mm,
guests who are going to be on that. That was our most downloaded month last year. And then we just concluded our spinoff podcast, Rise from the Shadows.
mm-hmm.
This past December, we had a 2-day episode with 6 guests. Incredible personal. I say it's more personal development than professional, but yeah, you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think I got a different
Mm-hmm.
name on everything. I keep it
Yeah.
professional. Edward Bodenheimer on LinkedIn, but I think it's 82 Bodie on Instagram. And yeah, hit me up. Let me know what you think about the shadows. And if anybody's got a story out there that you want to share with the world, we focus on overcoming those fears in our lives, overcoming those setbacks, those shadows that follow us throughout our lives. We conquer them and leave our audience inspired by episode end. So yeah, definitely check it out. What about you, Oleg?
I'm the same exact way, and I think outside of that, people can find me through Overcoming Odds, and that's the podcast. That's the platform that would host a lot of these events and stories where people can share their own challenges and hardships in life, and in particular, different ways that they've been able to overcome them. But just on top of that, I wanna thank you because I always appreciate every single time you and I get to connect, and I want to thank Joe and Jessica and Kenny and everyone else that's been a part of it today. James for making this, because I said this before, but I'll say it again. You and I, we might be the ones starting the conversation, but at the end of the day, it'll only go so far. So other
Yeah.
people's perspective really do matter. So I just I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone else, and I also want to thank the sponsor for this show called Spectrum Designs Foundation. It is based out of New Jersey, I believe, or New York in general. And this is a company whose founder has actually been on this particular show however many episodes ago. And one of the things that they do is they do a lot of custom prints of t-shirts and I'm sure other products as well. And the thing that they do is they support people who have different disabilities. And so that's something that Scott and I were able to be behind. And so I'm going to play a clip before we leave, but just want to thank you, Bodhi, for being a part of it, and Jessica and everyone else, because you guys are really the ones that make the show possible.
Oleg, you and that bird get some rest.
Sure.